Okay, so we're into Revelation chapter 16, and we're getting into the bowls. Okay, now we've had an introductory vision, and we've been, Scott talked about that last week in chapter 15, talked about the presence of God, even talked a little bit about Ezekiel. And the bowls are a very interesting portion of Revelation. The overview of the vision, he summons the angels. In verses 1 through 4, and then the sanctuary is the smoke. It's talking about the presence of God, and then we go in very rapid succession, very quickly, the bowls of wrath. So the plagues follow very quickly, and it's this ongoing theme. You have the introductory vision, you have mankind picking sides, and then you have judgment, and that's the cycle. And that vision that repeats itself at least 6 times in Revelation, and there's a 7th vision at the end. If there's one thing that you're going to remember at the end of this class, it's that chart. I mean, I'm very big on that, because I think if you understand that, it's going to change the way you understand Revelation, and it's much easier after that to realize the futurist view is probably not accurate. It really is more of a preterist view, but even in there, it's not a preterist view locked in the 1st century, but something that describes the breadth of human history. And our Western mind wants to apply specific prophecies in Revelation to specific people, to specific events, to specific struggles in history, and you really can't do that as much. There is some counter argument to some of that in regards to the destruction of Jerusalem and some of the conversation about apostate religion. And as we get into these chapters, we are going to talk a little bit more about apostate religion, and specifically the organization in Rome. And there are some other various branches of apostate religion that also kind of fulfill certain aspects of that prophecy. But again, it's more really about overall apostate religion, and you're going to see iterations of that all across the world. So looking at this overview of the visions, in the bowls, we're going to see man punished for his sins, and then in the last part of 16, we're going to see all the evil forces lying against God, and we're going to see final judgment. Okay? I won't go back over Revelation 15. I'm going to, since Scott did that in detail last week, but I do want to make a few call-outs that he may have covered, but I want to restate them before we go into the rest of the chapter, over chapter 16. The temple that is referred to in 15 is probably not a Jewish temple. He is using an imagery found in Ezekiel, and it's talking about the presence of God. But it is clear in this vision that this temple, man does not have access to God yet. That is, they're still being kept out of that inner sanctuary. And that sanctuary is inaccessible because the history of man is not complete, and it will be complete at the end of time. There's also a kind of interesting, one interesting call out on translation. The American Standard Version renders the words bright linen as precious stone, and that sort of changes some of the interpretation. There is some nuance on the translation. I think Scott covered Ezekiel last week, but one of the key moments in the book of Ezekiel is the Spirit of the Lord leaving the temple. And when they build the second temple, he doesn't come back, okay, in that form. And he's there. God is certainly there. God is everywhere. But there is a certain presence that God kept around the Ark of the Covenant and the temple that is no longer there in the second temple. And it turns out that to access the presence of God, you're going to have to become a Christian. And everything from that point forward, well, including everything before that, is really foreshadowing Christ. And there's a reason why God does not come back to that second temple, because he's setting up the stage for the arrival of the Son of God. So let's go into Revelation 16. And then I heard a loud voice from the temple telling the 7 angels, go and pour out on the earth the 7 bowls of wrath of God. For the first angel sent and poured out his bowl in the earth, and harmful and painful sores came upon the people who bore the mark of the beast and worshipped its image. And the second angel poured out his bowl into the sea, and it became like the blood of a corpse, and everything died that was in the sea. Okay, now here are the first 2 bowls. Now, again, you might get tired of hearing this because I've said it so much, but I want to say it again. The first beast is tyranny. To another extent, it is civilization. It is all things human. It is everything that man has pursuing in this earthly life, and it is the force of this life that governs our physical existence. And to participate in this physical world, we have to engage with the beast, and it's very difficult. We don't want to do that, but we have to get approval from our fellow man to do anything. And I don't think that that beast does have components within it. Those components are the 7 empires that have governed the earth, or governed the Holy Land: Egypt, Assyria, Greece, Persia, and I'm missing one, Babylon. And then those are the 5 heads that were, and then the 1 head that is Rome, and then there's always one to come. And so in that sense, they are those 7 heads, but they're not just those 7 heads. They really represent all of all of society, all of civilization. There is an order to civilization. It would be great if we all lived all over the world as we do in our subdivisions. We all have our house, we mow our own yard, and we eat our own food. But we know there's a lot more to it than that, right? We're very connected to our fellow man, even if we don't engage him all the time. And there are forces that are governing this world, and it's not necessarily the Illuminati or some deep dark secret society or the central bank or communists over on the other side of the world. Yes, they may all be manifestations of that, but it really is just the nature of man, that there is, like as Solomon says in Ecclesiastes, there are lords over them, and there are lords over those lords, and there are lords over their lords, and over them there are lords higher still. And at the end of the day, there's a king committed to the cultivation of fields. And that's kind of how society works, right? Society is there to provide order and structure so that all men can get what they need from each other. And unfortunately, some men end up on the top, and some men end up on the bottom. And that is the beast. Okay? It's kind of it's like, well, where does it say all that in Revelation? And it's like, well, it doesn't, but the point, word for word, does it say it like the way I described? No, it doesn't, but the apocryphal language, the symbolism, seems to be indicating that, especially when you look at, Revelation in its entirety. It is talking about the past, the present, and the future, not just something that happens often in the future. And you can figure that out by looking at the language that is used in the Old Testament and connecting it to the prophecies of Daniel, Ezekiel, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and the other prophets. Anyway, looking at the first 2 bowls, there to reflect on some of the language that is used. You definitely have to look back at the plagues of Egypt and see how the men are punished with boils. Then here, the men are also punished with boils. The sins of the men in society are, at first, they're just covered with boils. They're not dead. They're not being killed off, but they're very uncomfortable. Okay, but they still exist. Okay, and then the bowls are going to get progressively worse from their own. Kaufman points out that it's not literal sores, but they are suffering for sin, and they are suffering for this. They're being punished for their sins in a way that sinful behavior does lead to bad consequences. If I go out and get drunk, I become an alcoholic, and that's going to ruin my life. If I go out and I'm very greedy and I want all this money, I might destroy the relationship that I have with my family and children. If I go out carousing and just go after every woman I want, I'll destroy my life. It's that sort of imagery that's being invoked, according to Kaufman. Sin is apparent through all of society. It is important to note that there have been moments in history when there were people walking around with lots of swords, and they were dying by the thousands. And if you were living in the year 1347 through 51 in Europe, and even before that in China, during the earlier part of the 14th century, or even back in the 6th century of Europe, where there's another wave of Black Death, you would have thought it was the end of the world. You really would have, because there was literally a third of humanity dying. That's the death rate in Europe was about a third, and here it is, and we're looking at these bowls, and how many people are going to die? About a third. When we came out of the Black Death, people didn't know what to do. They were like waiting for God to come. It had to be the end of the world. The plagues so matched what was being said in Revelation. I kind of laugh sometimes when I read about people talking about an earthquake here or there and thinking that the earthquakes are getting more frequent, and that's signifying the end of the world. It's coming. I read people like that. I have a particular friend who is in another location where there are a lot of earthquakes, and he thinks that this is a sign that the Holy Spirit is moving among the people of his congregation. And I hate to tell him, probably the wastewater in the oil fields that are causing those earthquakes. But it's not, there's nothing there to signify that this is going to be the end. There's been a lot worse events in the past. So when we look at these visions, I do want to point out, let's compare the seals and trumpets and the bowls. And I think it'll become very apparent and very clear when you see it this way. There is some parallelism, okay? And when I say parallelism, I'm not talking about the style of Hebrew poetry, but something entirely different. But here you have the first 7 visions. There's a white horse, a red horse, a black horse, and a pale horse in the first 4, and then here the first 4 visions. The trumpets, the hail destroys a third of the earth. There's a flying mountain that destroys a third of the sea. The falling star destroys the fresh water. And the sun and moon destroy the sky. But the bowls also match the trumpets almost exactly. In the case, the hail destroys the earth. And you think about hail, little stones hitting all the people. Okay. They can survive, but they're getting hit. But they're not dead yet. Well, that's kind of what happens with the boils. They're getting hit, but this time with swords and not with stones. So the sea is attacked in the second trumpet. Well, so is the bowl. The bowl attacks what? It attacks the sea. The sea of. And what does the sea represent in Revelation? We've talked about it before. It represents all the people of the earth. Now the sea creatures. I don't know. It's saying talking about the sea creatures or what other creatures living in the sea. I don't know if that's a reference to the institutions of man, sort of moving about among the people. But it invokes that he's going back and covering the different aspects of the earth and just describing in very general terms destruction of human society and all that is going on. And that destruction is ongoing. It's not talking about a finite point in time. The rivers and springs become blood, and that is again a reference back to Egypt. We'll get into verse 3 and 4. And then the sun, like the 4th trumpet, the sun is invoked. So you have to see and stand back and look at look at that connection. And when you see that, I think it's a lot easier to realize that John is repeating himself from a different perspective and focused on something different. And in this vision, he's going to be focused on apostate religion. Okay? So also there's a sense that the visions are getting faster. I spent a lot of time early on, very trudging through the first chapters of the book to set up the visions. And now, as we get through this, I've got 6 more chapters to go, but I'm not worried because a lot of what is discussed in these later chapters has already been discussed. John is going to reveal himself, okay, from a different angle. And I can get to the material a lot faster. So that's going on there. And then again, to remind us, 42 months is representative of the entire dispensation of man. He's summing up 1 week as all of creation. God created the world in 1 week. And that's why you have Christ representing, he's the center point of creation, half of the week before him, half the week after him. And it is, that number is 3.5, of course. So it's 3.5 years, it's 3.5 days, it's 3.5, okay? And that's where that symbolism comes from. So the third angel poured out his bowl into the rivers and the springs of water, and they became like blood. And I heard the angel in charge of the waters, the angel of the waters, say, "Just are you, O Holy One, who is and who was, for who brought these judgments? They have shed the blood of the saints and prophets, and you have given them blood to drink. It is what they deserve." And I heard the author saying, "Yes, Lord God, the Almighty, true and just are your judgments." And so he is paying them back for shedding the blood of the saints. So he is going to punish the unrighteous. The righteous will be vindicated. And obviously there are several books in the Bible that are concerned with this theme, namely Habakkuk. Also Jeremiah talks about this on some. He doesn't, understanding that the righteous will be vindicated, and it can't just be the unrighteous being killed by even people that are more unrighteous. But someone has got to, at the end of the day, establish God's justice. And God is saying, be patient, wait, you will be rescued, you will be vindicated, and this is all leading up to salvation at the end of time. So violence will be returned on those who rejected the teachings of God and persecuted Christians. And he's heard the author saying the martyrs were under the altar in the first vision, and they are speaking here. So he is repeating himself back in the fifth part of the first vision. About when John lifts the table and there's the souls or the martyrs are underneath the altar. That's what he's reflecting back on. The only way that evil man can be corrected is by giving them up to those evil desires. And so it is, God is going to hand them over to what they wanted. God gave them up to dishonorable passions, for their women exchanged natural relations for those that are contrary to nature, and the men likewise gave up natural relations with women and were consumed with passion for one another. The men committing shameless acts of men and receiving in themselves the due penalty of their error. And since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up to a debased mind to do what ought not to be done. And it's in this particular verse, it is tied to sexuality, but we see this over and over again. People give themselves over to their desires, and those desires end up corrupting them and destroying them and take away all the joy of their lives. It is a very difficult thing to see people that realize at the end of their lives that they have wasted their lives pursuing earthly desires. Although I think all people end up doing that to some extent, and sometimes it never ceases to amaze me how even people with the best intentions can get focus on the wrong thing, thinking they're doing the right thing. And that's discussion is outside of scope, but I do want to mention it. I mean, I'm certainly someone who's looked back at my own life and realized I really wasted a lot of time pursuing the wrong things. But I thought it was the right thing at the time. And it's a hard lesson to learn. The fourth angel poured out his bowl on the sun, and it was allowed to scorch people with fire. They were scorched by the heat, fierce heat, and they cursed the name of God who had power over these plagues. They did not repent and give him glory. And then the fifth angel poured out his bowl on the throne of the beast, and its kingdom was plunged into darkness. People gnawed their tongues in anguish and cursed the God of heaven for their pain and sores, and they did not repent of their deeds. And so as bad and as evil as this world is, people do not want to, they don't want to humble themselves before God. They still pursue their desires until the bitter end, and they die in their pain, and they die in their agony, and they die in their futility, and then they criticize the one person that can offer them salvation, or one force, God. Wouldn't it just not be better if we humble ourselves before God and give our suffering over to Him and ask for His forgiveness, accept His forgiveness? And we can't do it. We struggle, and then and the people that are giving themselves over to God are greatly saddened because the rest of the world won't do it. So anyway, in the fourth and fifth bowls, cross-reference to Luke 21. Excuse me. Cursing in verse 9 means blaspheme. The sun signifies the morality of the world, and morality is being corrupted, and it now hurts man. Matthew 6:23. If the light that is in you is in darkness, how great is that darkness? And so we're talking about the corruption of virtue that has occurred within apostate religion. The total darkness are like the locusts who block the sun in the fifth seal. When the fifth seal is broken, these locusts come out. And again, Kaufman is going to point out that the sins of men come back. The locusts represent the sins of men that come back and harm those who are actually committing the sins. But the sixth seal, these massive armies come out, and they are compared to the locusts. And that is where you have complete societal collapse, okay? And in this time, we don't have to worry about, being surrounded by millions of soldiers from foreign armies around our cities. We don't have to fear that. But in modern times, that was definitely a very big concern for many cities. That's why they all had walls, right? Because you never knew when an army was going to show up around your city and take it over. And that's the imagery that John is using. In John 16:12-16, the sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and Euphrates represents the source of salvation, or source of food, of life in that part of the world. I mean, the heart of civilization came from the Euphrates River. We talked about Nimrod. We talked about the Tower of Babel. They identified the Euphrates as the beginning of civilization. Even their patriarch Abraham came from where? He came from the banks of the Euphrates. Okay, so the idea that the bowl of wrath is being poured out on this river. People try to go to modern times and they look at the Middle East and the violence that's occurring in the Middle East, and they try to attach that to end time, a precursor to the end times. And I have news for you: the Euphrates has always been subject to violence from the very beginning of time. It never ends, and it's because it is in the middle. I mean, so much of the violence in the Middle East is there because it is, in fact, in the middle. The Euphrates, just because of the geography and the way our history is worked out, it is the center of civilization. Now, there's other rivers that are important too, like the Ganges and the Nile, and there's other pockets. but when you look at the Bible and the area and the region that it's concerned with, Euphrates is definitely the center of the civilization in the greater narrative. So that's where the book starts. That's where the book is going to end. It's really that simple. Or it's not. I guess simple is not the right word for it, but that is the context that John is writing from. For they are demonic spirits performing signs who go abroad to the kings of the world to assemble them for battle and the great day of God Almighty. And so he is talking about, as civilization came out of the Euphrates, so did all the false spirits and all the false religion. And this is where the final battle is going to happen. And so in that context, you can see that this really is about all of civilization, not something that just happens in one finite moment of time. But know this, that if the master of the house had known in part of the night the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and would have let his house be broken into. Therefore, you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming in an hour you do not expect. Now, Jesus is talking in Matthew 24, and he's not using apocryphal language here. He's being much more clear and much more exact. And he's very clear that we're not really going to understand and know when the end times are coming. Some people talk about there may be certain signs in the sky, but at that point, really, the destruction is there. I mean, that is part of the destruction. You're not going to know this years and decades in advance and be able to calculate it. I mean, it's very clear it's going to be a surprise. Revelation 16, 12 through 16, behold, I am coming like a thief. And this is John, the sixth bowl. Blessed is the one who stays awake, keeping his garments on, that he may not go out naked and be seen as exposed. And they assembled them at the place that in Hebrew is called Armageddon. Important to note, I think one thing that's important to note is that John highlights the uncertainty of the timing that Christ will return, and I've already mentioned that. But this timing, okay, John is coming like a thief. We're going to have this fight on Armageddon, and people still want to talk about a specific moment. So, but that begs the question, what does John mean by Armageddon? So, again, the points here in this slide I've already mentioned. We're going to talk about Armageddon. You hear about Armageddon, okay? There was a movie many years ago, and it was called Armageddon. And the reason why it was called Armageddon is because it was very concerned about an asteroid hitting the Earth and destroying the Earth. It was a terrible movie. My father was a chemistry professor for 40 years. Now, he had a great scientific mind, and there were moments when I was a little child engaged in what dramatists would call the suspension of disbelief, right? That if you're going to watch something that came out of Hollywood, you don't watch Hollywood with a scientific mindset or a historical mindset. You just kind of enjoy the narrative and don't think about all the inaccuracies in film. Or if you do that, you'll never enjoy anything. Armageddon, though, was just over the top. And so I took my dad and I went and saw Armageddon, and it was the worst movie. Okay, and part of it was if you really were concerned about an asteroid hitting the Earth, there were certain aspects of that I thought that if they had included would have made the story much more interesting. But it was just insane what they were trying to do and land on this asteroid the way they did it, and but it just violated all kinds of scientific rules. They didn't understand gravity. They didn't understand the Earth's atmosphere. They didn't understand physics. I kind of feel that way about people when they study Armageddon. And what is this Armageddon? Okay. Well, first of all, it means Megiddo in Hebrew, and there is an actual location called Armageddon, and we call it Tel Megiddo, and it's really the site of the first great battle that happens between the Hittites and the Egyptians. And it's the first great battle that we actually have any kind of historical documentation for. And it was very famous, and it preceded the Hebrews and their arrival into the Promised Land. Okay? So there was a famous historical battle that occurs, and that is that site has been destroyed many times, and John is invoking that language. Okay, but there's a lot that happens there. There's a site of 3 major battles. The Thutmose III destroyed the Canaanite coalition in 1478. Necho II defeated Josiah on the way to Carchemish in 609. Josiah defeated King of Megiddo in Joshua 12:21. Even the British and the defeat of the Ottoman Turks in 1918. It is a very important physical location in the Promised Land where battles are going to occur because of the geography. You control Tel Megiddo, you control the Promised Land. Okay? Now that is a very nuanced point. Okay? Like, how would you know that? And that's why we're here in class to discuss it. The battle, this was a site of great battles, and he is saying this is going to be like the Gettysburg of good and evil, or this is going to be like the Battle of the Bulge, or this is going to be like, I don't know, Okinawa, if you're looking at, want to use a World War II metaphor. He's invoking that language to describe a pivotal battle that is going to occur between good and evil. And that pivotal battle is ongoing, but at the end, God is victorious, and He will destroy all that is good and evil. And I gave here is a picture of the geography about where Megiddo is, and it was conquered very early in Joshua's conquest, because it is from there that all control of the valley can be enforced. Okay, and this is where it's located, even now the Jews occupy it, so they can control the area around the northern part of Israel. So there's all this is the view of Megiddo, and it's big long plains, and it's a very important hill. So Josiah was the last good king in the original kingdom. The references to Necho and the second in the battle against Josiah, or I haven't really brought that into the lesson, but that's being discussed here. These plains would make a great battlefield. They're very famous, and so he is using something that does speak to people of the first century that we are not really attached from. But the idea that modern forces are going to assemble on this mountain to have a fight, it doesn't appear that that's going to happen anytime soon. And why would they fight there now? He's using that as symbolic. Revelation 16:17-19, the seventh angel poured out his bowl into the air, and a loud voice came out of the temple from the throne saying, "It is done." And there were flashes of lightning, rumblings, voices, sound peals of thunder, and a great earthquake, such that as there had never been seen since man was on the earth, so great was that earthquake. And the great city was split into 3 parts. Again, the great city is all cities, civilization. And the cities, the nations fell, and there he says it, the great city fell, but the cities of the nation fell. Okay, he's saying, it's civilization. It's how he's invoking this. And God remembered Babylon the Great to make her drain the cup of the wine of the fury of his wrath. And every island fled away, and no mountains were to be found. And great hailstones from about 100 pounds of talent in weight each fell from heaven on the people, and they cursed God for the plague of hail, because the plague was so severe. It is done. This is judgment. Judgment is coming. It's the end. But it is something that happens at the end of civilization. And so, I want to remind us of Genesis 8:22. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. So as long as we are here, we're to keep going. And at the end, there's going to be nothing we can do about it, and it's going to come very quickly. But God has promised relative stability of the environment until the end. And in this particular vision, it does appear to be the end. So we'll go back and finish up a little bit of 16, or go back and make some points that I didn't make, but I'm going to bring it up in 17 because that's where it has to receive application. And that's where we're going to talk about the Great Four. And it's a very fascinating list. And it's surely it means she does represent apostate religion, and it has a lot of application to our lives today. So I hope that was insightful, and I hope you all have a blessed week. Any questions? Okay, thank you so much.